All right, welcome everyone. Nice to see some familiar names and faces, and looks like a couple new folks. Um, so if you haven't been on the calls before, I usually just take a little bit of time at the outset and share something, and then we kind of open it up for conversation and um, go from there. So I think if we look at our ordinary approach to well-being, in the most general sense, humans seem to be seeking a sense of fulfillment and well-being and happiness and so on. And I guess the same could be said arguably for spiritual seekers. They're searching for, a greater sense of freedom and aliveness and clarity and awareness, all the things that spiritual seekers are seeking for, God, enlightenment, and so on. And our tendency is, in either of those scenarios, the more spiritual context of seeking, or the, if you will, ordinary human context, is that we basically have a hierarchy. And the hierarchy is certain experiences are better than others. And certain experiences are more representative of whatever it is that we're seeking: well-being, freedom, enlightenment, God, and so on. We have this hierarchy, and the hierarchy is a function of really largely how we're defining things, basically. How we have a tendency to split the world up and then create a hierarchy of better and worse, right? Pleasure and pain, and so on. And that whole way of framing our search for well-being, if you will, is, entirely understandable, and nothing wrong with it. It is a perspective, and but what we're exploring on these calls, and I write about as well, is another perspective, we could say, and that is a perspective that opens up another view, we could say, another understanding, which is that all moments, all experiences are fundamentally the same. How are they the same? How are they the same when everything seems to be so different and so distinct? Well, that requires that we discover, if such a thing even exists, let's just consider it a hypothesis, there's something basic about all phenomena, basic about all experience. And we have to discover what that is. We have to find what that is that somehow transcends the seeming differences and distinctions. Otherwise, we'll always be operating within that framework of the hierarchy, again, which is based on our descriptions. And so a lot of my work is about helping to explore experience in such a way that the sameness, or the equalness of experience, if you will, is revealed. Its more basic nature, its more fundamental nature, its radical nature, in the sense of radical, what is the root of it? What's the root of what's here right now? What's its basis? And ultimately, its basis is not conceivable. The basis of this moment can't be conceived, because it's too infinite, as I always say. It's unthinkable what's here. It's beyond definition and description. And the discovery of that is one very powerful way to discover what is, in a sense, common to all experience. And in that discovery, it cuts through the hierarchy, and we can discover, as I call it, another order of well-being altogether, one that doesn't depend upon how we're describing things. It doesn't depend upon the hierarchy. It cuts through the hierarchy, and we discover something that's, say, kind of an intrinsic freedom, an intrinsic well-being that is the basis of every moment. One metaphor I often use it, the metaphor of the ocean and the waves. So to use that one for a moment, you look out upon the sea and you see all these, sort of different shapes that we call waves, right? And if you touch any part, if you look at the sea and you touch any part of the sea, no matter what that sea is like, no matter how we might be characterizing it as calm or rough, choppy, very placid, whether the waves are quite large or basically it's totally flat, there's really very little undulation of that body of water. No matter where you might, if you put your finger somewhere and you touch some part of the sea, it doesn't matter which part of the sea you touch. It doesn't matter which wave you put your finger on, which undulation you put your finger on, you're always touching the sea, aren't you? You're not actually touching. So the idea of touching a part is sort of, we could talk about it like, oh, there, I'm touching a part of the sea. But actually, when you touch any part of the sea, you're touching the sea, because it's one thing, isn't it? It's one singular thing. So, or we could also say, no matter what part of the sea you're touching, you're always touching water, no matter how the water is appearing, right? Your hand is always on water. That's what's most basic about all these forms and shapes that the sea can take, is that they're all made of water. So we could say that similarly with experience, even though we experience this wide range descriptively of a full range of everything from great ecstasy and joy to incredible heartbreak and sorrow and everything in between, that whenever we touch any experience, which is all we're ever touching is experience, in a sense, experiencing experience, we're touching the fundament, we're touching what is the basis of everything, because the basis of everything gives rise to all of this experience. So we're always touching, in the same way that when we're touching one part of the sea, we're always touching water. When we touch any experience, we are touching the basic state. We're touching reality. We're touching God, always. And this is discovering the non-hierarchical nature of our experience. In other words, there's not one experience that's closer to reality than another. There's not one experience closer to the sea of life than another. This is all the sea of life, isn't it? Arising as each momentary state, each momentary appearance, each momentary thought, feeling, sensation, perception, memory, image, all of it, right? All of it is a movement of something. We could call it life, we could call it vitality, we could call it energy, the energy of existence. Isn't it all the movement of that? Isn't everything alive? It's a movement of something. It's really impossible to say what this movement is. It's clearly movement, it's clearly dynamic. What is it a movement of? What is it a movement of? It's a movement of aliveness, a movement of presence, a movement of divinity. So from this perspective, it doesn't matter what you're experiencing. You're always experiencing reality. You're always experiencing the ground. You're always experiencing life. Because every experience is life, albeit in its own particular form. So it's this, in a sense, I'm talking about, we could say, kind of reducing all of this to this common denominator, all of this diversity to some common denominator. It's not a diminishment of it to do that, though. It may seem like, oh, I'm kind of dumbing it down, I'm oversimplifying it to reduce it to, oh, it's all just life, all this unthinkable, rich diversity, which is so amazing. And I'm just like collapsing it all into this singular thing called life. Because the reason it's not really reducing it is it's not like when you see that this is all life, when you feel the reality that this is all the movement of life, all the movement of this energy we call existence, all the diversity doesn't go away, does it? Like right now, I mean, it's like you can see this is all life, and it's not like suddenly it's just like some blank, like whitewashed reality where everything looks the same. It's not like that at all. It still is so colorful and diverse, isn't it? And sometimes the moment feels like this, and sometimes it feels like that. But it's always what is. It's always the presence of what is. And recognizing this is very profound to do, because you can begin to discover that you're never separated from the ground of reality itself. You're never apart from it. And it doesn't only exist in high moments and blissful moments, the ones that feel good. And this is why, one reason why the very, very simple practice that I'll sometimes share of allowing everything to be as it is can be so potent. Because that simple practice of, maybe we'll do that in a moment together, of not trying to micromanage your experience to turn it into something better that you imagine would be better, either more awake, more enlightened, happier, more clear, whatever you think is potentially missing, more full. By allowing it to be as it is, what can be revealed is its intrinsically full, complete, whole, undivided, perfect nature, just as it is. But it's non-hierarchical in the sense that it's present in and as all experience, not just certain experiences. But if we stay in the realm of I'm going to meditate or do yoga or whatever in order to feel something different, to get into a better state, more still, more calm, more relaxed, we can miss this non-hierarchical view, this everything is divinity view, this understanding. But it's difficult to communicate this. That's for sure. As I stumble along trying to convey something that's so beyond words, because our words and our descriptions are constantly reinforcing this idea of difference and distinction and hierarchy, isn't it the case? That this is better than that. Says who? Says the interpretive apparatus of consciousness is who is suggesting that this is better than this, that this is higher than this, that this is more God than this. It's an idea. There's a and a lot of the spiritual traditions, most of them that I've explored from my standpoint, tend to reinforce this hierarchy rather than really cut through it. And one example of that is this idea of what's sometimes called the view or awareness. And awareness is sort of often this kind of privileged space. And then there's all the content and all the thinking and all the interpreting, right? That's the problem you're trying to get away from, because that's right. I mean, that's what's creating all the division and distinction, and the suffering is all the narrative. So I want to find the pure view of awareness that's sort of dispassionately noticing all of the content that can make us so crazy, right? And that's a reasonable approach that can have its own benefits, for sure. I've experienced them myself, but it's for me, it's ultimately misleading. Because why? Because you've introduced yet another hierarchy, which is that what is aware of the content of of all of this is somehow better than the content. The content is delusion, and the pure, clear view of awareness is what's true. So you have to get back to that clear view of awareness and forget about all that content, because it's, and you've just introduced a whole nother hierarchy, haven't you? So I wrote about this in my last book in one chapter called Resting as the View. And it can sound, when you hear like just rest as the view, just rest as the view of awareness, like that's something I should do as opposed to what I'm doing right now. That's what we think, and that's how it's often taught. Okay, you're not resting in the view now, so now I'm going to tell you how to rest as the view. Right there, I've created a distinction and a sort of a hierarchy. It's better to rest as the view, right? So we're going to meditate together and rest as the view. So here's a little different take on that. And it's very consistent with what I was just sharing about cutting through the hierarchy of experience, okay? Resting as the view. In some traditions, the practitioner is instructed to rest in the view. The view in these traditions refers to that which is aware of every fleeting instant and is often described as an unchanging stability, a vast and spacious clarity within which all experience arises and passes away. Right, so for example, and sometimes I'll even introduce the view of awareness to my grad students in the way I just described, because it can be helpful, I found, for them to have an initial introduction to the view in this way, because they feel very caught up, like most humans do, in the stream of thinking, and they've got worry going on and rumination and negative self-thoughts and self-talk. And then I point out to them that, like, whether you're having positive self-talk, wow, I'm a good person, I have capacity, I feel confident, or you've got negative self-talk going on, I talk about how what's common about that is that there's a knowing, whether you feel great sadness or great joy, there's a kind of a knowing that underlies the sadness or the joy. And that knowing, in a sense, isn't really defined by the sadness and the joy. That's this idea of the distinction between awareness and the content of awareness. And that's fine, again, but I'm talking about something a little bit different here. Based on the way the view is often taught, like I was just describing, we conceive of it as being something distinct from whatever is being viewed, right? So, you're looking at your computer screen. That's the object of awareness, okay? So that's the object there. And then there's the thing that's viewing the object. Let's call it awareness or consciousness, okay? So we just made a distinction there. You feel that right now. There's the object I'm viewing, my computer screen or my phone if I'm looking on a phone, or whatever you're viewing visually. And then there's the viewer or the viewing awareness. That's the view of awareness, okay? That something that's distinct from what's being viewed, the object of perception. However, if we think of the view as some privileged domain, and this is how it's often taught, like the view of awareness is somehow privileged, it's better than what's being viewed somehow. It's clearer, it's less distorted. Some privileged domain, some special state or realm we must first locate and then rest in, we will miss the fact that this very moment is already the view. So in other words, we've made a distinction that the view is something else other than what's here right now. I just had a friend of mine who teaches a lot of stuff around spirituality and awareness, and he interviewed me on his podcast, I don't know, a couple years ago, and we hadn't been in touch in a while. He sent me an email, and he was wondering how I was doing, and then he asked me, he said, lately I've been finding a couple of little things that I say to myself to help me to get into the state of pure awareness. And he said, it's very powerful. Like, I instantly get into the state of pure awareness. And he said, what do you find? What are your little tricks to get yourself into pure awareness? He asked me. And it was very interesting to contemplate the question, because I realized that I completely don't relate to that way of talking about it anymore, even though I once did. And because what it's basically suggesting is that something has to change. In other words, this isn't the pure view of awareness right now. That's basically, because if it was, then why would I have to make a little trick with my mind to get me into the state of pure awareness? So I wrote him back and I said, well, basically, I just don't see it that way. And even though I do all sorts of things to change my experience because I'm human, and I might decide to go take a trip because I want to go explore another place that I think will be enjoyable. In other words, I'm changing my experience. There's nothing wrong with that. But to me, it doesn't have anything to really do with freedom, the kind of freedom that I'm exploring with everyone in these calls. Excuse me, in these calls. So again, he was suggesting there's this hierarchy. There's the pure awareness that, wow, he's really found this way to get into. And I'm like, as opposed to what exactly? Because from the standpoint of what I'm talking about, there's no going from one place to another. There's only going from this to this, or going from this version of this to another version of this. If we think of the view as some privileged domain, some special state, as I was saying, that we must locate and then rest in, we will miss the fact that this very moment is already the view. To be sure, that which is being seen or viewed right now, whatever you're viewing perceptually, is forever changing, for sure, right? But the seeing itself is constant. You're always seeing. Something's always being experienced, always being felt, always being viewed. And so from this vantage that I'm describing, to rest as the view, quote unquote, is simply to see that there is only resting in the view. Only ever the knowing of whatever is being known. The seeing of whatever is being seen. The feeling of whatever is being felt. So again, rather than trying to feel something in particular that you associate with whatever, enlightenment or just happiness, it's about just noticing that all there is the feeling of whatever's being felt. That's entirely different. And that turns out to be, for me, from my standpoint, the real freedom, because it's that which is inclusive of all things, of all moments, of all states, of all experiences. That's what real non-duality, as I understand it, is that which is inclusive of everything. That's the non-hierarchical nature of it. It's inclusive of everything. It is everything. That's why it's inclusive of everything. This isn't, from my standpoint, about finding and then resting in the view, but rather seeing that there is no possibility of ever being out of the view. Resting is not something we do. It's simply noticing that the view is inescapable, ever present as this very instant, and the next, and the next. So we needn't rest in the view, but simply see that the view is present right now as each fleeting moment of experience. Here's one way to think about this very simply. And I'm using a visual kind of an analogy. The view suggests kind of visual, seeing the view, but it could also be feeling. It's just another version of the view. So we're constantly viewing something different, aren't we? Even if you're looking at the same view of the scenery of your life right now, this moment, it's changing. It's not actually holding still. It's got its own dynamism. Perceiving is dynamic. But if you, let's say, look straight ahead for a moment, whatever you're looking at, and that's the view, whatever is appearing in your field of, the visual field is the view right now, let's say visual view, right? This is the view. You're resting in the view. This is what's happening, this is the view. If you turn your head, like whatever, 90 degrees, and the view changes, doesn't it? Now you have a different view. But there's no hierarchy. There's just the view, whatever it happens to be. Do you see what I mean? There's just a view, whatever it happens to be, whatever it happens to look like in that moment. And it's always different, isn't it? Close your eyes for a moment. Now the view's different, isn't it? It's a different view, but it's still the view. It is the view of the instant, of the moment. Whatever your gaze may happen to fall upon, know that right there is the view of whatever is present. Rest effortlessly right here in the heart of this knowing the steadfastness and constancy of the view. This is the paradox, is that the view is always changing, but it's always constant. It's always the view. It's just that it always looks different, but it's always the view. Seeing something, that's the view. Feeling something, that is the view. Experiencing something, that is the view. Feeling something, that is the view. There's only the view. That's all that there is the view. The view of whatever is appearing. So as we just sit here for a few moments, eyes open or closed, this is the view. This is resting as the view. You can appreciate the nature of the view, which is its constant dynamic nature, right? It's not a static thing, is it? The view is, it's like, I think I've said this before, it's like the pictures in Harry Potter, if you ever watched any of the movies, they're moving, you know, they're not still photos on the walls. So you look at a picture of, you know, your grandmother, you know, today's Mother's Day. So if you have a photograph of your mother on the wall, it's like in Harry Potter land, the picture is alive, it's moving. But so that's what our view is like of life, isn't it? It's alive. So just appreciate how alive the view is, but that no matter where you go in the field of experience, there's no escaping. You can't get out of the view. And you can't get into the view because there's only the view of what is. Do you feel that? Do you feel the sense of that? It doesn't matter what you're feeling. If you feel sad, that's the view. If you feel happy, that's the view. If you feel clear about what I'm saying, that's the view. If it's confusing what I'm saying, then that's the view. The view is confusion, what you might call confusion. But it's all just the view. It's all just what's happening. This cuts through the hierarchy of one view is better than another. Oh, you might have preferences because you are human, right? Like I like that view better. You know, I like looking at the Grand Canyon more than I like looking at garbage on the sidewalk or something, right? But they're both the view of that instant, of that moment. So just sitting here together, and there's no need to manipulate the view of this moment, the feeling of this moment, the apparition of this moment. It's like you don't need to manipulate the wave to make it the ocean. In other words, the waves of experience are the view. You don't need to manipulate the waves of your experience to make them more into the view of God, the view of sacredness or divinity or freedom or whatever it is you might say you're looking for. Because the view is appearing as each moment. So the moment doesn't need to be manipulated to make it into the view. It is the view. This is the view, no matter how it's appearing. Eyes closed, eyes open. Everything is it. Everything is the view. There's no escaping the view. There's no getting into the view, no getting out of the view. It's like no matter where you might travel in the field of experience, you are just, in a sense, coming to another view. That's it. But it's always just the view of this instant. There's never two views. There's only ever this view. And that is the view of whatever's appearing in this instant, inexplicably, magically, the view appears, a view of the moment appears. And vanishes to be, in a sense, give room for the next view to appear. The ceaseless dynamism. Ever changing, but always the view. So the real relaxation is that you don't have to seek out the view. You don't have to try to figure out how to get into the view. You can relax because this is the view. In other words, the moment is being viewed, isn't it? That there's nothing else going on but the viewing of the moment. What else is ever happening but the view of the moment? Your view. No one else's view, your view. How it's appearing. I mean, whether we're trying to view the moment with some kind of clarity or awareness or not bothering at all with that, the moment is being viewed, isn't it? Again, it's what life is doing. Life is appearing, isn't it? And the appearance of the moment is the view. In a sense, awareness is, if there's something we want to call awareness, it's inseparable from the view. It is the view. There's not two things, awareness over here and the view over there. There's just the view. And awareness, if there's something that even exists called awareness, it's inseparable from the view. The observer and the observed, so-called, are one thing. The perceiver and the perceived are one thing. You can't pull them apart. Can't pull them apart. It's one thing. It can be described as an appearance and then a viewer viewing that appearance, but it's one thing, isn't it? Can't pull it apart, can't tease it apart. Happiness is much the view as sadness. Heartbreak as much the view as joy. Well, why don't we open it up for some discussion? Anyone feel moved to explore anything in particular with respect to what I was attempting in my own halting way to try to characterize and describe? Just impossible to do, but I'll do my best.
Hi, John.
Hey, Ed.
So the procedure of homogenizing the view,
Uh-huh.
there seems to be one more step, and that is losing yourself in the view?
Maybe so, maybe not. Because in a sense, what I would say is the most radical kind of view, to use that word again, is that whether seemingly the sense of self has dissolved into the view, and there's just the view, or there's a sense of a self viewing something, who cares? Like from this all-inclusive perspective, they're both just fine, whether there's a sense of a self there or it dissolves.
But it's only fine if you can include both. I don't think it's fine if it's always separate.
Yeah, I mean the paradox is that it's fine if it's fine, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, if our sense of it, in other words, there's this is kind of, it's a subtle thing, and then not so subtle in other ways, but it's like, let's put it this way. If I could say that what we might call a moment of suffering is equal to a moment of what we might call not suffering, right? And then it's like, well, that doesn't do a whole hell of a lot of good for the person that's suffering, right? Because it's like, that's, how is that helping them, right? From a suffering standpoint, because you're like making it sound like it's, well, they should just go ahead and keep suffering in a sense, right? Or just continue to be imagining themselves to be a separate person and feeling all the consequences of that, feeling like the world's unsafe and they might have to defend themselves and they've got insecurities and the whole, right, what we call psychological suffering that can ensue from that sense of being separate. But recognizing that, oh, it's hard to describe, but it's kind of like, seeing that this experience of seeming to be separate is just an appearance, right? It's just a view. It's just what's happening in that instant. Is it a problem in that moment? Or is it just what's arising, what's just appearing? It's just what's present, right? I mean, because one of the things that happens when we stop trying to make the moment different than it is that the notion of it being a problem, it's a very powerful way to cut through that notion. Not in an abstract philosophical sense, like, oh, everything is fine, that's like an idea, but as an actual experience. Like if you feel separation, for example, just as what's present, is it, you can discover, I'll put it this way, you can discover that, number one, that there isn't any separation, and also that it's not a problem, it's just what's here. So what's tricky is that you know, for example, I'll often talk about how, you know, you can explore that sense of separation, discover that there is no separation, right? That there's no division, there's no boundary. I mean, you've been on a lot of these calls and we explore that a lot. And that's a very powerful perspective, and it has a very different felt sense to it, a lot of different implications, because there's no division, there's no threat, there's nothing missing, because there's just this singularity, just this wholeness. So it's a very different perspective with a very different set of kind of implications. But what can easily happen is that we can turn that into like another hierarchy. Like, discovering that view of that perspective of inseparability is somehow better, higher than the view of separation. And now we've just split the world up again. But is the world actually split? See how that's what I mean by the subtleness of it, the subtlety of it. Does that make sense, Ed?
Well, it's best you could put it into words.
Yeah, right.
No, you're describing a subtle difference of experience
right.
in being separate and knowing you're not separate, because you know that the appearance of separation is an appearance and not reality.
Right. But that's also
And
true of the appearance of no separation. That's also not reality either.
But somehow you have to have experience the contrast.
Experiencing the contrast is very powerful, particularly in a kind of remedial way, because consensus reality only seems to recognize separation in a sense, right? Only tends to see that the world is made of seeming pieces, and the pieces are oftentimes in opposition to one another in one form or another, including the pieces of my experience where I have a mind that I seem to be struggle with. It's like two pieces that are, I'm like in this like kind of tug of war with the content of my own consciousness, to use that example, right? So as a kind of corrective, one can access this other, there's another perspective, right? That actually you can't find division experientially. But as you know, because we've hung out together before, in this context, that I'm often like beating the drum about how this is beyond concepts, beyond any way of characterizing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the question of like, am I separate, or in other words, is like look at Ed and John, like, are we two separate autonomous creatures, or is just a singularity here? Like, what's going on from the standpoint of reality? Like, are there two autonomous beings having a conversation, or is there no division whatsoever? There's just a wholeness. In a sense, the reality of what's going on here is absolutely, I can't conceive of. It's not either of those, and yet it includes both of those perspectives somehow. It so radically transcends any notions of what it is. Like, is this moment moving, or is it still? Do I have free agency, or is this just happening? I mean, all these kind of ways that we create these distinctions as perspectives, it's like we can embody the perspective in a way. We can feel I can embody the perspective of being separate from you. Like, I can feel that. I can feel that in a sense, like, oh, I'm talking, there's another human being here. And then I can have the sense of what that's like. You have your own life. It's not my life, and it's like a whole world. And then I can feel the perspective of like, I can't tell where what I call me ends and you begin. I mean, I can't find that as a discrete line. And then I can feel the perspective of that, of like, wow, there's just one thing here, one event that we might call a conversation, but not two things happen, just one thing happening, right? So which one of those is true? Well, in a sense, they're both perspectives, and they're true as perspectives. In other words, they have validity within their own frames of reference. But ultimately, what's here is absolutely can't be collapsed into either of those perspectives.
So is that a third perspective?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like it's the perspective of, remember last week we were talking about the referenceless perspective, in a sense, it's like there's no bearing, there's no bearing place, there's no place to land as a perspective. It's just like a free fall of like inconceivability of like the unknown. And I often talk about the describability versus indescribability of experience, right? So let's say I feel like I didn't sleep that well, let's say, and I feel a little bit tired in the morning. So I've just characterized what's appearing, right? The view, and I call it tired. But then I go to like look at what that is, as I often say, and I can't quite find what it is. I can't say, well, I can't pin down, well, what is tired, right? So in a sense, it's like completely, utterly unknowable and indescribable what's really going on that I'm calling. And it's, the moment showing up as this pattern that I'm describing as fatigue or tiredness. But what is that actually, right? I can't come up with an answer to that. When I explore it, I come up empty-handed. So then that begs the question, well, is reality definable or indefinable? It's both and neither and beyond both, right? So we could call that a third perspective, or we could just call it the recognition that this is beyond perspectives, and yet it includes all perspectives, is what I would say. This can't be collapsed into a perspective, ultimately, definitively, and yet it's inclusive of all perspectives.
Well, this meeting has been so perfect for me, John. And if anyone can describe things well, it's you. I gotta say.
Sometimes I feel like an utter failure at it. So
oh my God, no, you're like the best. It's phenomenal. It's like, oh my God. So it's perfect for me, this particular meeting, because I've been kind of a shut-in for the past month. I had an injury and I've been kind of flat on my back until here I am sitting, but I had been. And normally I'm a very active person and I'm always like, hiking or kayaking or something. I'm always in movement. So being flat on my back, just staring out the window for about 4 weeks, the words that you're saying, and when you said I can relax because this is the view. So I'm staring out the window a lot and, I couldn't walk. And that was, it was really painful to walk. I couldn't walk. So I was stuck there. And, in the old days, I would have been like railing against like, oh my God, I hate this. This is horrible. I'm laying here. When am I going to get better? But in the last few years or whatever, just the appearance of the moment is the view. So I would be like, okay, this is the view, and there was so much more peace and contentment or whatever, but there's also at times frustration.
Sure.
But it's like so many of the things you said, I wrote them down. It is what it is, and no escaping the view, and I can relax because this is the view. That was a big one because I wouldn't have been able to relax, not long ago. And just surrendering, these words, are not good, but just, this was the view. And it was a constantly changing view too, because as I look out the window, all of a sudden the breeze is blowing the tree, the leaves, and this bird. I saw more in the last 4 weeks in a microscopic level at my front yard of people walking, and I'd say, oh my God, these people are taking it for granted that they can walk. And there were just so many gifts of just being stuck on the sofa for 4 weeks. And this, the words, that was the view. And not struggling against the view was just profound.
Yeah,
And
it is. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it is profound. And it's in an interesting way. It always, my experience is it kind of always feels profound somehow. And I can't explain why that is. But I think an aspect of it is that there's such a deep-seated kind of most prevailing kind of idea we carry around as humans that the grass is greener somewhere else, right? That this isn't it. Like it's got to be, this isn't the miracle. I hear, if I'm a spiritual seeker, I hear all this stuff about absolute reality and God and samadhi and bliss, and well, it couldn't be this because I'm not experiencing that now, but but actually you are. And in other words, you're experiencing, this is absolute reality. What else could it be?
And
What
that
else
is,
could this moment possibly be?
and just that recognition or that information or the knowledge, whatever it is just, it's just life changing. And even those words, life changing, that doesn't make sense either.
Right.
But I think,
But
you
it
know,
is, it absolutely is, because it's like we are running after something. We're looking for something. We might, each of us define it in our own particular ways. I mean, for me, for a very long time, in all my spiritual searching, you know, I put it initially in kind of theological sort of terms. It was a kind of yogic interpretation of God, but I was like looking for God realization. I was looking for God, right? I was on the search, looking. I would also say I was looking for peace. And it was so interesting, you know, and I think that's a deep human desire to feel a sense of like rest and equanimity and peace and contentment. I mean, those are deep human yearnings. But it's so interesting, like we just kind of often fail to appreciate that looking for that is it's actually agitating, you know, because we're looking for another view. Where's the view? Where's the view? It's like, come on, there's got to be a better view. It's like, meanwhile, like, look what you're viewing. It's like, look at it. It's like fucking
exactly. I mean,
unbelievable.
the end of seeking is like, oh my God, transformative. I love that. Where's the view? Where's the view? That's exactly right. It's like, here it is.
It's funny. I mean, I remember like when this, you know, first began to dawn on me, and it was like, I ended up writing this poem in my very first book called The Great Sadness, which is interesting because I was like just weeping like these tears of joy of realizing like, wow, I've been looking for home. I've been looking for home. I've been looking for home. And the moment was always home. This is home. But the great sadness was this very interesting feeling of like, there was such a sense of the joy of coming home. Like, oh my God. But there was this bittersweet aspect of like, wow, like I imagined for so long that I wasn't home. And the heartbreak of like imagining that I was missing, you know, that I was missing this wholeness that I was looking for, like a crazed person for decades, imagining that it wasn't this. Some other view, come on. I want the real fantastic view, you know, the one with the angels and the all the lights and the shit. I read all those spiritual books about the view. It sounds really groovy. It's like, come on, where's the groovy view?
I know I didn't want the ordinary view,
Right.
which turns out to be the best view of all because it's the only view there is.
Exactly. Very well said. Better than I ever could have said it. It turns out to be the best view because it's the only view there is. I'm going to quote you. It is the only, it's like, yes, exactly. Like it's the only one you could ever have. And here it is. It's like, there's that moment of like, I remember when I went through this period of grief, which I've shared a couple of times, and it was like, this is the only experience you could have right now, John. This is the view. It's perfect. Not in an the problem with that word perfection is that I don't tend to use it very much, is it has this kind of evaluative hierarchical notion kind of woven into it. It's like perfect as opposed to what? Imperfect? You know, so, but I don't mean it that way. It's like the perfection that doesn't have an opposite. It's perfect, like you said, Pam, because it's the only view. There's no, you can't ever dream another dream than the one you're presently dreaming. How could you? And then when you do dream another dream, that will be the view.
I think only is more powerful than oneness.
Oh, say more about what you mean, Ed.
So we're often told that we want unity, we want oneness,
Right.
but the idea of only, I think, is even more powerful because it doesn't have that opposite feel, oneness as opposed to two-ness. Or
I mean, in a certain way, what we really want is what is. That's what we really want to fall in love with, is this. Because in other words, if I have a moment where everything's blown wide open and there's a sense of samadhi and oneness and indivisibility, and what happens if that goes away, as that fades as an experience? I mean, I've been to enough retreats with spiritual teachers over the years to know that the inevitable question that gets asked, or a common question at least, is, wow, I had this amazing experience, like yesterday or 10 years ago. And I would like to have that back. Where did it go? Well, we could say, suffering is wanting what is to be other than it is. That's one way to understand what suffering is. But what is can't be other than it is.
I'm discovering there's just so much freedom in not having choice.
Mm-hmm.
And when, like I said, when I'm laid up on the sofa, I didn't have a choice
Mm-hmm.
about doing anything because I was in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And there was actually freedom in that, because and it's kind of like what you're saying about, now I'm not going to be able to go back to what you said, but there's just a lot of freedom in a lack of choice. And if this is the view, and realizing this is the view, I don't know, there's freedom in that. There's not the seeking to find better views or wanting it to be the old view, or there's just, I can rest in this view.
Right.
Because this is it.
And the beautiful thing about kind of seeing that it's always the view is that then even when there's a moment of wanting something else, that's the view. And that's okay too.
Then everything's okay.
I mean, I remember really kind of having this intuition a long time ago when I was in a spiritual tradition, quite a few years ago now, where, desire was the great boogeyman, like wanting was the problem, right? That's what was creating suffering. So I was wanting, but then I went into a place of wanting to not want, wanting to be free of desire, which was yet another desire. So it was like still that argument with what is, it was like, and that's just kind of made me laugh at one point where I was like, oh, wow. So I've told this story before. It was a very profound moment I had, like, man, I don't know how many, maybe 15 years ago, where I was reading this book. I was in Hawaii and I was reading this book. I forget the name of it. It was a nice book, kind of a non-duality sort of book. And somehow I was getting, he was talking a lot about the inseparable nature of reality and so on. And it looks like, oh no, Pam, you're still here. This looks like I didn't see your, anyway, I'm talking to everybody. But anyway, I was noticing this sense of feeling like I was a subject in a world and wanting to transcend that sense, right? Because I was reading this book about transcending that sense of separation. And I was like, come on, where's that sense of the oneness of everything, the sense of the self-dissolving, as Ed was kind of asking about. And it was like, there was just this very spontaneous thing that occurred where it was like, well, what's happening right now is the experience of being a self. So just be a self. In other words, don't try to get beyond that to something you imagine is better, that transcends the self. And it was just a sense of just like, I'm using words, it's not exactly what happened, but it was like just being a self, just being that, the view of that moment, right? And it was like so counterintuitive, but in a sense, it was like just being separate being a separate self and not struggling to try to get beyond the separate self was absolutely transcending the separate self in that moment. It was just like complete, like everything just was perfect as it was. And there was just this sense of boundlessness by not resisting the fact of feeling bounded and trying to get beyond it, if that makes sense.
I used to feel like I had to dismiss my humanity, that was separate. No, that was
Right.
bad. That was
You have
wrong.
to get beyond
But
it,
to
yeah.
embrace it now, it's so refreshing that it's okay.
Well, I mean, if you take something like feeling bondage, okay, I feel bounded in something, caught in something, okay, and so I've heard about getting beyond that, getting free of that. So then I'm like looking for where's the freedom, but I'm not seeing what's here because I'm looking for something. I'm imagining something. If I'm just with the actuality of the experience of what I call bondage, the feeling of being bound, and I feel that, I mean, as I will often say in these calls, feel any state that you have a label for, and you will feel the way in which it is without boundary. It has no edge to it. So the feeling of separation has no boundary to it. Isn't that a trip? But if we're trying to get beyond separation to some other state, we've split the world up again into this hierarchy of better and worse, and we miss the inclusive nature of this. And
It's
so,
sort of like getting beyond the concepts.
definitely, I mean, the sense of there being a hierarchy is, where does that come from? It comes from our interpretations of things, doesn't it? I mean, even the notion of positive and negative, like, I mean, if the sun explodes right now and all of life is destroyed on Earth, the Earth is blown up to smithereens. Is that positive or negative? It just is.
It's positive.
It's positive. It depends on your perspective, right? I mean, but from a human-centric kind of point of view, it's like it's a terrible catastrophe because all of life on Earth has ended. But
no, but
I mean, supernovas are happening all the time, aren't they? Out in this apparent universe that we live in, stars are blowing up. It appears to be very natural.
But you wouldn't be there to have a perspective.
Maybe not. Or maybe you would discover that blowing up is absolute reality, like everything else. Something that's ultimately indescribable. I mean, that's why I ended up writing that chapter and final chapter in was it this book? Yeah. This life that is also death, where my mom, maybe it's makes sense that I'm mentioning this since it's Mother's Day. And she passed away about 5.5 years ago. And amazing woman. And there's no way to communicate what happened in the moment of her passing. We were present. My dad's on the call right now too. Hi, Dad. And we were there with her, and again, it's a matter of perspectives. From one perspective, this was this heart-wrenching thing, like losing this amazing woman who was passing away. It was. I mean, it's an incredible loss. Never would deny that for a second. But what I saw in the moment of her passing was, for some reason, I just, probably just because I'm the way I am, but as I was feeling all the emotion and drama of the moment of her passing, and it was very dramatic. What is more dramatic than the passing of a beloved? I mean, it's the great mystery of death, right? It's just unbelievable. It was like drama on steroids. It was intense. The energy in the room was intense. And the emotions were thick, the human emotions, as thick as, you can imagine, right? And then there was just this sense of like, wow, so all of this drama, not to deny one iota of it, it was just this sense of this raw presence of it, the suchness of it, as the Buddhists would say, the energy of it, the the beingness of it, just the pure presence of what's here, no matter how it's being described. And there was just sense of just dropping into the raw energy of all this drama and emotion without any, there was no impetus to try to deny any of that emotion. That wasn't what was happening. It was just like feeling the raw, pure presence of it. And as I felt that presence in the room, it was literally like the presence has this quality, one of its qualities of the presence of this moment, the view is, and the view is a good word for it because the view is illuminated, isn't it? It's being seen. The moment is being seen, isn't it? So the moment, the view is luminous. And as I felt the raw presence of what was going on, as my mom was taking those slow, long death rattle breaths, was this is the view. This is pure presence. This is the pure presence of reality right now. What we call the passing of this being. And it was literally like a light, the luminosity of the view just felt somehow like it got brighter and stronger and brighter and stronger. And it felt like it reached this pinnacle of like luminosity of the moment. And in the moment of it reaching this kind of pinnacle, she stopped breathing. And I remember it was just as clear as day to me, and that's why I wrote the chapter, that life is the same as death from this standpoint. They're the same thing. They're the mystery. They're the view. The moment of what we describe as death is pure vitality, pure aliveness. It was drenched with aliveness and meaningfulness and vitality, the moment of my mother's passing. I mean, how do you explain that? But it was. So the chapter is called This Life That Is Also Death. It's like one thing that can show up as birth and what we call life. It can show up as what we describe as a passing away of a being. Again, it's a perspective that I'm sharing, and it isn't to deny the other perspective we could say of my mother's not here in her human form any longer, and that's, we miss her because of who she was and how life got to dance with itself in the form of, that relationship that we had. For me, it was my relationship with my mother, and for my dad who's on the call, with his partner of many, many years. And, but what is death, And my mother at the time of her passing was asking that question. She was asking that question. She was kind of had her own religion, but she couldn't fall back on that religion. It was really interesting. It was not providing comfort for her. So she was asking questions about death. And I explained it the only way I could possibly explain it, because I don't know, I haven't died, so I don't know what it is. Right? But the way I described it was, well, it's like we're like waves, that rise up out of the sea of existence. And at death, we just become what we've always been, which is the sea. In a sense, we just return to where we came from, which was whatever the genesis of reality is, which is not, it's impossible to say what that is, right? So in that sense, we're already that way now, we're already the sea, but we're living this life stream, it appears, as embodied creatures right now. And yeah, I wasn't planning on telling that story, but again, it's Mother's Day, so why not?
The way I've been thinking about it recently is thinking about how water can be transformed into ice, can be transformed into steam. So anything that can be transformed into something else must be the same thing.
Yeah.
Must be. And so that's one way of thinking about it.
Absolutely. It's like, we can't say, I can't say what the fundamental, like the moment morphs into the, in a sense, it's like in other words, the taking shape of the moment, we could say is, what's the view of this moment, right? That's the shape of it. the form of it, the sense of it, the feel of it, the vibe of it, the flavor of it, right? We could do all these ways to characterize the form that it takes. This is the form of this moment. What is it that's taking form as this view, as this moment? How could anybody possibly answer that question? I mean, really, like that Zen koan, what were you before your grandparents were born? So that's the question. Like, what is? There's no answer to the before. You can't find the before, for one thing, because you can only find this view, right? You can't find the previous view, except as memory. But the memory of the previous view you were having, whether it's like the view I was sharing about my mom, that's 5.5-year-old view, it's like a long time ago. I can't find that actually other than as a present view, right? I can't find the past or the future.
John?
Hey, Michael.
Hey, good morning. Great to hear you. At what point, at what phase in one's spiritual journey would the whole, and I'm asking this to myself as well as to you, at what point would the whole, say, the self-doubt and the constant checking, the self-monitoring, is this it? Is this,
right?
Am I abiding as that?
Right.
Not quite. Well, what? I think I heard years ago that Milrepa or someone like that in a retreat setting. It was probably Milrepa. It was back in the 80s. I heard a reference that whoever it was saying the whole the inner turmoil of even doing sadhana, even doing meditation, and wondering, when will I be free?
Right.
And that itself, there's a tension in that, as a sort of angst.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And that's kind of what we've been, exploring a little bit today, for sure. Yeah. 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 I mean, at what point, can we be done with that, right? All that self-checking and self-evaluating, and is this, am I doing, it's kind of like, it's so funny because I was thinking about something I wrote as I was sharing earlier, and maybe if it's all right, I'll read it. It's a short little piece I wrote just a while back that really speaks to exactly what you're saying and what we've been talking about today. And it's called Throw Away the Scorecard. And there's a part of us that is subtly, or maybe not so subtly, looking over our shoulders, checking to see how we're faring, how we're feeling. Am I doing okay? Am I experiencing what I want to be experiencing, or what I imagine I should be experiencing? We're a bit like those judges at the Olympics, holding up our cards, rating our experiences. Maybe we see ourselves as spiritual seekers chasing after whatever lofty states or insights or realizations we're chasing after. Or maybe we're just seeking to feel a little bit better or suffer a little less in our lives. In either case, we're poised at the ready, scorecards in hand, assessing how we're doing according to whatever evaluative metric we may be using. Particularly if we're spiritual seekers, our scorecards might look something like this. How aware am I? How mindful am I being? How in touch with presence am I? Have I gotten caught up in some web of thinking or imagining again? Am I fully open and receptive to what is? Or am I in resistance to what's arising? Am I awake to the here and now? Or am I lost in some time-traveling daydream? But here's a thought. How about we just throw the whole damn scorecard away? Imagine that. Imagine not always checking in on yourself to see how you are, how you're faring. What if you relaxed all the cataloging, all the evaluating, all the self-assessment and self-measurement, even for an instant? What if you threw away all the assumptions about what you should be experiencing and instead simply experience whatever you are experiencing, which you can't stop doing anyway? Try it right now. try to stop the flow of experience. It's not possible, is it? What's here is here, before we can even have any say in the matter. Experience arrives unbidden, without warning, and then it departs before we can say a single thing about it. You see, the whole scorekeeping thing, it's always late to the party. This assessment of experience, always a fraction behind reality. But the second we give some thought, feeling, or sensation a score, that experience is no longer here, passing away in the very instant of its arising. So throw away the scorecards just for a moment and see what that's like. Can you feel the relief of not having to make this experience other than it is? Which, as it turns out, you can't even do anyway.
Wow.
Which book is that in? Is that in?
It is in no book. at the moment.
Oh man.
It's on my blog, but that's the only place it exists.
That was beautiful, John.
Oh,
That really spoke to. That was great. I wish I could get a copy of that. That was extraordinary. Wow. You know what it reminded me of, as you began reading that. I think this might have been in one of Ramdas's book, and also Jack Kornfield, who used to read it. It was if I had my life. It was a poem by a woman. I think it was quite old. If I had my life to live over. Do you remember that?
I remember that poem. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's an oppressive aspect to that self-evaluation, isn't there? That constant, like, am I in the right place? Am I there? Am I doing it okay? It's like, wow. It's like, and meanwhile, like we were saying, I don't know exactly when you hopped on the call, Michael, but
a half hour into it.
Yeah. I think you might have missed. I was talking about the view, and I was giving kind of an alternative perspective on it, which that this is the view, and this is the only view you could ever have, and that the relaxation, it's not so much like, oh, I'm going to relax into the view, but what's relaxing is to see that this is the view, and so we can relax sort of without having to find another view, and because here is the view, and as it turns out, I mean, the good news is that the view really is astonishing, and just it is really, like, the more we kind of begin to appreciate the view, you could say, it's just keeps showing more and more of its bounty, more and more of its nourishing, full, alive, awesome, powerful, stunning nature, really. I mean, it's stunning. The moment is stunning, isn't it? This moment, the view. Stunning.
I absolutely love the refreshing, radical way that, I did catch the tail end of that part of your part of the meeting, and also the general message anyway, just the way it undermines the whole sense of striving to say, be whatever, to be mindful, be in some particular state, or maintaining some perspective. When I first did the Vipassana retreats, and this is just my response. I'm not judging that practice or making any sweeping statement about it. The way that I experienced it, though, is we would hear, pay close attention, moment to moment. And I was sitting there on the cushion and thinking, okay, so I have to be mindful. But right now I'm thinking that I'm trying to be mindful, but by thinking I'm not actually being mindful. But I I need to be mindful of that. I was getting tangled up in this, like, am I mindful yet?
Right, exactly. It's exhausting.
It was for me. It just, I didn't connect with that practice.
Yeah.
It just doesn't.
Right, and you and I have talked about this, outside of these meetings several times, but how, the if you take something like, okay, I want to see this moment clearly, that, I'm going to strive to see this moment clearly. I'm going to work at it, like really get it down. But meanwhile, this is miracle of seeing itself, like it's really transcendental in the sense of impersonal, and like, look at something like seeing color. Like, are you willing your way into
Right.
seeing color, figuring out, how am I going to see color? I'm going to become a good
Right,
color
right.
seer. It's like,
Right.
no, this astonishing, impersonal, effortlessly present intelligence of whatever, call it life, consciousness. It's
Totally.
instantly seeing color right now.
I know.
How?
Totally. Totally. The great Zen master Benki
Yeah.
said everything happens it's a functioning of the unborn Buddha mind. Are you hearing the bird?
Right.
That's just the nature of the mind to register to perceive.
Right.
Without,
And it's
that,
pure,
that,
and it's pure intelligence and pure miracle and pure,
yeah.
pure, and again, the effortlessness of that is
Yeah.
profoundly relaxing to see that.
Yeah.
It's like, wow, there's a relaxation of like effort, because it's the knowing of this moment, the seeing of this moment, the feeling of this moment. It's like, I mean, how do I feel an experience? I don't know. I mean, my hands are touching this wicker chair that I'm on. Like, how do can I willfully manufacture the sense of touch? Or is
Mhm.
it just happening? I mean, really, like, how incredible is that? I mean, the sensual experience of being a human it's just given to us as a gift of life, that these capacities are here. And
Yeah.
it's quite something, huh?
I mean, I often what's very inspiring for me is I sometimes fairly often uh, bring to mind and reflect on Trojan Trungpa's definition of Mahamudra. Maha, of course, meaning great, and mudra meaning gesture.
Mm-hmm.
And he said in one of his books that everything is a perfect gesture of itself, and it is referring to nothing other than itself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that's like suchness. It just
Right.
everything is being itself perfectly without any effort, just a natural
Right.
expression.
Right. And we are like that, the flowers growing outside the window where I'm sitting. I mean, they have their own nature, don't they? They're growing. Like,
Yes.
there's all these twisted ways the branches have gone. It's like, how did they
Yes.
go that way? Well, it was their nature to go that way, wasn't it? To grow in that particular way, to be that way. The petals look exactly the way that's that gesture of they're absolutely being themselves perfectly, and in the sense we are too. We are just like everything else. We are nature, and so the way this moment is being seen is the expression of your nature, the way the moment is being heard, the way you're hearing my voice in the exact, precise, specific way you're hearing my voice, understanding my words to whatever degree. Everything that's all the reactions to that. I mean, everything is like the gesture of your perfect nature, of your nature as it is. And I mean, there's no explaining that. It's just unfathomable. But
Yeah. It's like we read about miracles in the Bible, like the parting of the Red Sea, or all of that. But just the unfolding of this, with all its complexity and all of its vibrancy, that you could
this is
say
the
is
part. This is the parting of the Red Sea in every instant.
that's right. That's right.
This is walking on water in every instant.
That's right. That's like nothing. That's just like
That's right. That's exactly small potatoes.
That's small potatoes. That's right.
Well, thank you, everyone. Lovely to be with you as always.
John,
Really.
did you want to give the concert? Did you?
Oh yeah, I was. Thanks. This evening, if anyone's interested, I also, some of you know, I write music, and I got invited to perform this evening at like a devotional singing thing that this group that's been meeting for decades, and historically they've done a lot of my music as part of their meetings with one another. And they invited me to jump onto their Zoom this evening. Sadly, we're still doing these things over Zoom, but that does mean that people from all over the world and outside of California could join. But it's from 7 to 9 this evening. Just send me a private message if you want. I can send you the Zoom information if you're interested in checking it out. It's free. And oh yeah, someone just if you want to call in, if you ever call into Zoom, because I know some of you do that. Somebody just sent, I'll just give you the meeting code now. You can jot it down if you want. I don't, the Zoom link's too long, but the meeting code is short. It is, 1 second here, I'll just give you that. Hold on a second here.